Hello and welcome to the heart of the BBC's newsroom here in London. I'm Nikki Schiller.
And I'm Kirsty Grant.
And why are we here? Well, it's all because of President Biden and what he said on Sunday night. He, on Sunday night, decided that he would no longer run for the presidential election in November against Donald Trump. It, of course, follows a month of speculation after he did that rather disastrous TV debate with Mr. Trump. Now, after he said he wasn't going to run, he said that he would like his Vice President, Kamala Harris, to run instead. So we are here to answer all of your questions about the US presidential election.
Yep, and we're live on TikTok, Instagram and the BBC News website. So if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments. We'll be feeding through them and we can ask them to our experts that are going to come on and join us. So any thoughts below? We're
going to get into all of the politics going on. But first, Charli XCX has got involved in this.
Yeah, somehow Charli XCX has now become one of the main names being talked about today.
Of course she has.
So we'll rewind. This all started when Charli XCX, obviously British, singer, songwriter, producer, tweeted out saying Kamala is brat. If you haven't followed Charli XCX's album release, you probably won't know what that means, but it's the name of her album, and it's sort of the best Charli XCX style of endorsement she could have given to Kamala Harris to run for president. So she tweeted that, and then next thing you know, Kamala Harris's HQ, which used to be Biden HQ Twitter account, the official Twitter account changed its header to this green strap, which emulates Charli XCX's album cover, sort of thanking her, I guess, for her endorsement. And of course, if you haven't seen Charli XCX's album cover, it's just a bright green square with the word brat in the middle. So very easy to emulate for Kamala Harris HQ.
And of course, it's gone viral, which is probably what Kamala Harris's team were hoping.
Very clever PR, to be honest, and very timely because everyone's doing these brat, remakes at the moment. So not an unexpected thing to be reporting on today, but interesting nonetheless.
Because the youth vote is probably going to be quite key to her going forward if she gets the nomination.
Yeah, very key. And I think Kamala Harris is someone who has often been kind of memeified online. Like there's a lot of viral videos of Kamala Harris. Maybe her team have decided to play into that a bit and kind of go with the viral young people vote that they can try and pick up, I guess. But we'll have to see what they do.
Well, let's get more on this. Ari Center is from Politico and he knows a lot more about this than definitely I do. Ari, thank you for joining us on BBC News. So were you surprised that the Kamala team jumped on this Charli XCX?
I was not that surprised. It's definitely, not what you might expect to see coming from American politics. But Kamala Harris is a uniquely memeified persona, I think, in the American imagination, especially among young people. And so, if we're seeing all across social media, everything about coconut trees and context, I think it makes sense that they would lean into that rather than trying to distance themselves.
Yeah, so come on, explain the coconut trees.
So the coconut trees come from a clip of Vice President Harris saying, quote, "You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you." She's quoting her mother saying, "Did you fall out of a coconut tree?" It really doesn't matter what the context of that quote was. What matters is the fact that young people have ran with it and have turned it into a meme. The vice president saying all of these crazy things, talking about Venn diagrams being unburdened by what has been. That's been what she's been made famous for. And now that she is potentially going to be the next president of the United States, I think her team is really trying to embrace that, the fact that so many young people know her for those quotes.
And I think the memes and kind of TikTok attempts by people in the UK general election, we saw that, earlier this year. We discussed a lot here at BBC News whether or not that actually has an impact on voting. Do you think young people finding her funny or seeing her header and finding it entertaining, does that actually turn into votes?
I think that remains to be seen. I will say one way that Vice President Harris might be able to have an edge from young people is her policy on Gaza. The Vice President has been much more critical of the conflict happening in Gaza and of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu than Biden, and that was a major factor that was influencing young people in the United States to consider not even voting for President Biden. We saw these massive protests at the tail end of the last academic year, and we saw lots of people saying that they would not commit to Biden and would either not vote in the election or vote for a third-party candidate. So I think that that could be a major factor that could get people, to young people in particular, to come out and vote for Vice President Harris.
And how important is social media going to be in the November election? Because we forget here in the United Kingdom just how much money is spent by the political parties in the US.
Right. I think, social media is definitely going to be important. It is always important. I think it's certainly at the top of mind in both campaigns' calculus, right? We see, both campaigns have TikTok accounts, both campaigns have sort of ridiculous Twitter presences. And so it is certainly going to be important. And that's a very interesting shift this time around, even compared to 2020. We are seeing much more of a focus on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or X, than cable news, for example.
Ari, stay with us. We're after your questions, aren't we?
Yeah, comment down below. We're live on Instagram and TikTok. So if you're watching us on there, you can drop a message below and we will work our way through them and get back to you. And we have plenty of experts to throw your questions to.
Yes, one of them is standing just here. Come in. Will Vernon is here. Now, Will was our North America correspondent until very recently. So you've been part of all of this palaver, shall I call it, up until this point.
Well, I left just before all the fun started, didn't I?
Were you surprised at what President Biden did on Sunday?
I think yes and no. No, because I think the writing was on the wall since the debate. Even before the debate, there were serious questions about President Biden's age, his mental fitness for office. Months before, polls were showing that 70% of Americans thought that he was too old to be president. There were a series of gaffes and blunders and stumbles. There was that report, right, from a special counsel. It's basically like a justice official in America a few months ago that described President Biden as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, right? He failed to remember kind of key dates in his life. So there were all kinds of concerns, but the debate last month really was the beginning of the end, wasn't it? That disastrous performance against Donald Trump, where everyone saw a real mental decline, I think, in Joe Biden that was clear to see. So in some ways, no, but when that announcement came, I think we were all just floored by it, weren't we? It was one of those moments that you remember where you were and what you were doing, I think, forever.
Why do you think it took so long? Because I think there were obviously rumours of it for a really long time. Like you said, the debate was a while ago now. Why did it take so long for him to eventually change his mind? And why do we have so many defiant statements from him saying, I am running, I will be running?
I think the reason that it took so long is partly because America has a really weird political system for all kinds of reasons. But one of the weird things about it is that it's very difficult to get rid of a presidential candidate or a president. In the UK, for example, if MPs want to get rid of their party leader, they just send anonymous letters. It's all very hush-hush and easy, relatively easy. In America, the only person that can take the decision that Joe Biden's going to pull out of that race is Joe Biden, right? There's no other mechanism to force him to step down. And for a while, the chatter amongst the politicians and the journalists in Washington was there's only two people on earth who can stop this, as in bring an end to his candidacy. One is Joe Biden, the other is Jill Biden, his wife, right? So I think the reason it took so long was just simply because Joe Biden wanted to carry on running. There's very few people who will admit that they're unfit for office, especially due to advanced age, because that's the reason that we think he took the decision to stand down, although he didn't actually say that, did he? I think because he wanted to carry on and there was no one around. Remember, if you're among the elite in Congress, in the party, in the administration, are you really going to risk your whole political career, your whole future, potentially, by coming out publicly and saying to the president, time to leave?
And also, I suppose, because he's still in office until November, technically, does it sort of undermine the rest of his term if he's now said, I'm not fit to, run again?
I think it definitely undermines it.
Maybe that was a worry.
Yeah, I think that definitely undermines it. There are already calls from Republicans, that's obviously the opposition, the opposition to Joe Biden's own Democrat Party, a lot of calls from them saying he should resign now. The Speaker of the House, who's a really important political figure in America, he's come out and said, well, if this guy is not fit, not good enough to be a presidential candidate, he's not good enough to be president, full stop. He should resign immediately. Now, I think that's unlikely to happen, but Nick, you want to make any predictions?
No, I wouldn't want to make any predictions after the last few days. You've been sending us your questions, and we're joined by some of you to ask Will and our other experts your question. First of those is Lily Croucher, who is a student in the UK. Lily, thank you for joining us on BBC News. What is your question?
Hi there. So just wanted to know, why haven't President Obama and Nancy Pelosi endorsed Kamala Harris, and do the Democrats have any reservations about her becoming the nominee?
Okay, this one's definitely for Will to start with. So why hasn't President Obama come out and endorsed Kamala Harris? Because yesterday Joe Biden immediately came out and said she's the woman that needs to be the next president, and quite a lot of other senior Democrats did. But interestingly, not Obama and not Nancy Pelosi.
Well, firstly, what is an endorsement, right? An endorsement is basically a public statement of support. So if you're a politician or a public figure, you say, I support this person, I think they're the best person for the job. This is a big talking point in Washington today. Why didn't Obama do it? Because this is one of the problems for Kamala Harris, right? She got some major endorsements, but not everyone in the party did give her that endorsement. I don't think we should read too much into it. And people around the Obamas have, in the last few hours, been telling journalists, kind of anonymously, that this wasn't a snub, right? This wasn't some kind of middle finger up to Kamala Harris or anything like that. That Obama kind of sees himself as this elder statesman, kind of maybe above the personal politics. Another question that people were asking was, why did Nancy Pelosi not endorse Kamala Harris? She's former Speaker of the House of Representatives. She has huge power within the Democrat Party. And the reason we think that Pelosi hasn't yet endorsed Kamala Harris is that she has an incredibly close relationship with Joe Biden, and she's apparently just very upset that her good friend, her colleague, a man she's worked with for decades. I mean, we're talking about people who have, 50 plus years experience in politics. Kind of sounds a bit crazy, doesn't it? But someone she's worked with for so long, it's basically the end of his career now, right? Suddenly, as we were saying, we weren't really expecting it to happen. So she's kind of coming to terms with that, and that's why she hasn't endorsed Kamala Harris yet. But I think if we see the Democrat Party uniting around Kamala Harris in the coming days, and they better get a move on, right? There's only 105 days until the presidential election on the 5th of November. It's less than a month until the convention, when the Democrat Party hold their convention. That's when they all get together and actually officially decide who's going to be their candidate for president. Now it's not going to be Joe Biden. So they haven't got much time. They're going to have to get their skates on. So I think when we do see the party coming together and saying Kamala's our girl, then perhaps we'll see more of these party bigwigs throwing their support behind her.
Okay, Lily, does that answer your question, and do you have anything else that you want to ask us?
Yeah, that does actually. I know Obama said he wanted to call for an open competition. What would that kind of look like if that was to go ahead?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. I'm going to bring in Ione Wells, who is actually near President Biden, where he lives in Delaware, where, of course, he is recovering from COVID. Ione, an open competition, what would that look like as far as we know at the moment?
Well, there's kind of two different options about what this could look like. Essentially, if people didn't all get behind Kamala Harris, then essentially delegates would be free to vote for who they think is more suitable. There is talk that there could be a kind of virtual vote happening in the first week of August. We're told sort of senior Democrats are meeting to try and establish what the process is going to be. If that was to take place, then if she got a majority, then she would potentially be sort of virtually approved as the nominee unless anybody were to challenge her, in which case the votes might be slightly divided. The other option, if that virtual virtual vote doesn't go ahead, or if it did go ahead but she didn't get a majority, would be to have a kind of open convention. The Democrats are having their convention in Chicago towards the end of August, and if that became a sort of free process, then essentially delegates there would basically have the right to back whoever they wanted to, and that would potentially be a lot more of a kind of free-for-all, because you suddenly would have delegates backing whoever they saw to be the most suitable candidate, and it turning into more of an open vote. But as it stands at the moment, there is still nobody sticking their head above the parapet publicly challenging Kamala Harris for this nomination. So at the moment she remains unchallenged. That could of course change in the next couple of days though.
Okay, Ione, stay with us.
Just quickly, we've had a comment on Instagram. B2E Rennie says, who is going for vice president? Ione, while we've got you, do we know any answers to that?
Well, there's certainly some names doing the round, and again, this kind of depends who definitely gets the nomination. If Kamala Harris gets that nomination, there's a couple of names that have certainly been sort of in the mix for this. One of them is Josh Shapiro, who's backed Kamala Harris, also sort of a governor in Pennsylvania, and that's seen as a very key state to win. So if he's popular there and she thinks he could drum up support there, then that might be one possible option as well. There's also Andy Beshear, who's a governor in Kentucky, a young politician, again, a state that's pretty Republican. So I think she'll be kind of trying to think about who might be sort of popular candidates that could both drum up support from voters, like young voters in particular, who they need to turn out, but also voters in key states like Pennsylvania that are pretty close at the moment, key states that any presidential nominee would need to win if they wanted to get a place in the White House.
Okay, Ione, thank you for the moment. Lily, thank you very much for your question. Will, I just wanted to pick up on what was being said there. We keep hearing this word swing states and how crucial they are going to be. What is a swing state? Put it simply for us.
So a swing state is basically the 6 or 7, it's a little bit kind of debated what actually makes a swing state, but we can say there's 6 or 7 crucial states that will basically decide the election. It's really interesting actually, because we talk a lot about opinion polls, don't we? Who's ahead, Trump or Biden, Trump or Harris? Often those are national pictures, so they look at the whole country and say, right, how many people in this country support one candidate, how many the other? But actually what matters is these swing states. That's states that are more or less 50-50. And because of the system that America has, the electoral system, we know that how almost all the other states are going to vote. We know that they'll either overwhelmingly vote for the Republicans, Donald Trump's party, or they'll overwhelmingly vote for the Democrats, right, Biden/Harris's party. But the 6 or 7 swing states, we don't really know which way they will go. And because of the electoral system, the electoral college system in America, that means that those 6 or 7 states, some of them don't really have that many people in them. Yeah. They will decide the election because they will be enough to kind of tip the scales in favor of one candidate. So either Donald Trump or whoever will become the Democrat candidate, we expect it to be Kamala Harris.
So basically, a swing state is a case of either of the candidates might possibly win it, and if they win it, that might help them to the path to the White House.
Exactly. It's basically a state where we don't really know what's going to happen, and whichever way it goes, that will be just enough to get one candidate over the line. But interestingly, if Kamala Harris does become the official nominee for the Democrat Party, she does particularly well among minority voters, voters of color, black women, for example. 97% of them vote Democrat. And there are large groups of these minority voters in several of the swing states. So some, experts in America are kind of tossing up the numbers, getting out their calculators and saying, well, actually, Kamala Harris does very well with these groups. They're in, the state of Michigan or the state of Georgia. Actually, that could work in her favor because all that matters are the swing states. The rest of the states, we can pretty much ignore them, if I can say that.
Okay, fine.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for sending in your questions. Please keep dropping them below, and we will get to all of them. We've still got Irie from Politico with us. So have a listen to this clip, which is from Amani, who sent us in this question. She's 22, and she's from Surrey.
Kamala Harris Harris winning the presidential election would mean that she's not only the first woman to be president, but also the first woman of Black and South Asian descent. Would these factors, combined with the fact that she's had little time to campaign, mean that the odds are too far against her?
So a topic we started to touch on there. Irie, did you hear that question, and do you have any thoughts on that?
Right, so this is definitely something that people are talking about. I think we can split it into two parts. The fact that she's had relatively little time to campaign absolutely means that the odds are stacked against her, right? Campaigns start years and years out. We did not know that this was going to happen. She did not know that this was going to happen until yesterday. And so that definitely means that she has an uphill battle. That being said, her identity as a woman, as a Black and South Asian woman, that could impact her electoral chances, but it's also important to remember that in the 2016 election, a woman won the popular vote, even though Donald Trump won the Electoral College. And then before that, Barack Obama, who is a Black man, won two elections. He won in 2008 and 2012. And so that shows that Americans are willing to vote for Black and for women candidates, but it will still be a challenge for Harris, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Will race be a factor in this election if Kamala Harris goes through and is the nominee?
Of course it'll be an issue. It'll be something that's talked about. There are some who say that as a woman of colour, she is at a disadvantage. There hasn't been a woman president before, right? Hillary Clinton came close in 2016, didn't quite manage it, was beaten by Donald Trump. There are some people who say that America isn't ready for a woman president. In terms of race, Barack Obama was twice elected. He was the first Black president in history. But as I say, it can be an advantage as well, right, to appeal to those key groups of minority voters. So I'm sure it'll be an issue. She has already broken records, right, set new, I guess you call them benchmarks, right, the first Black woman vice president in history. Whether she can become president, be the first Black woman president in history, that would be a fantastic achievement, wouldn't it? But who knows? I mean, Hillary Clinton, there are some analysts who say she didn't win because she was a woman. I'm not sure whether that's the case, but we'll have to see.
Okay, more questions are coming in. Edward Anders is a tech startup employee and joins us now. Edward, what's your question?
Hi there. I'd like to know whether there is a risk to the Democrats that internal party politics may result in them selecting a nominee who is unable to win against Trump.
Interesting one. Let's go to Ione, who is in Delaware. Ione, what do you reckon?
I think I caught some of that question. I think the question was essentially that is there going to be a potential problem for the Democrats if they're seen to be internally fighting? Would that help them or not to beat Donald Trump? I think this has certainly been a big concern of Democrats at the moment. There was concern, particularly over the last couple of weeks, that all this internal fighting within the party about whether or not Joe Biden was fit for office could well put them in a worse position when it comes to convincing the electorate that they should be in power, be in government in the next next term. I think one of the things that's interesting to bear in mind about this is that obviously Kamala Harris at the moment is the only sort of person who has been put forward as a potential successor as the presidential candidate. There isn't anyone else who is challenging her at the moment. So for now, the Democratic Party seems pretty united, which is a big change from the last couple of weeks. And that is something which I think they hope will help them if they can present and continue to present a kind of united front. But I think Donald Trump and his campaign has already capitalised a little bit throughout this campaign on what they've seen to be or accused of being sort of disunity within the Democratic Party. And interestingly, just yesterday, some senior Republicans were putting out posts saying things like, if President Biden is stepping down and ignoring millions of people who voted for him, then that is undemocratic. So trying to sort of use that as an attack line on the party. I think that's something we can expect to probably hear from Republicans a lot more in the next few days.
Ione, I'll ask you this one if you're still there. Ashley Ward says, why in Britain do we even have to care?
Well, that's a good question. I think the main thing, main reason really, is that the US president is somebody who has enormous amounts of power around the world, incredibly influential in different aspects of our life, because of course there's different ways in which different governments around the world work together. One big example at the moment in terms of a sort of European audience is the war in Ukraine. The US is by far and large the biggest donor of military aid to Ukraine at the moment in their war against Russia. There are big question marks about kind of what happens depending on who gets the nomination, depending on who is the next president of the United States. Is that something that continues? What is the next president's stance going to be on that? Because that has certainly been an issue of sort of controversy in this campaign so far, with some Republicans, including Donald Trump's running mate, being quite anti-support for Ukraine and aid to Ukraine, not really feeling like it makes much of a difference or is achieving much. So I think there's sort of big questions like that which do have a global impact when it's a case of sort of considering why the rest of the world should care about this.
Okay, Ione, thank you. More questions coming in. Henry Day, who is a politics graduate, has sent us this question.
With Kamala Harris now set to seemingly win the Democratic primary and the presidential nomination, unopposed, will we see any major policy shifts from the Biden administration, or will the Dems now be seeking to present a united front, especially after such a tumultuous 24 hours in US politics?
Henry, thank you for your question. I'm actually going to put that to Erie from Politico. Erie, what do you reckon to that?
She's actually going to be unopposed. Nobody has thrown their hat in the ring yet, but that could change. In terms of polling, Biden and Harris have slightly different policy positions, but I will say, it was the Biden-Harris administration, and so she's going to be ultimately responsible for whatever policies Joe Biden was also responsible for. And so I would say that polling isn't going to immediately change, but as we see her, get out more, as we see Vice President Harris actually introduce herself more to the American people, that could definitely change.
Okay, Ari, more questions coming in?
Yep, we've had one from Lisa, which says, as Kamala Harris has been mostly unseen vice president, who media has painted as most fatuous politician, Fatuous. I need to zoom in. With approval rating as low as President Biden's, how can she improve chances of a successful campaign?
You need glasses, I think.
I think I do.
Let's put that one to Will.
How could she improve her chances of a successful campaign? Well, first, I'm assuming you mean presidential campaign, because first she has to become the nominee. We must keep on reminding everyone that she isn't actually the nominee yet. That happens at the convention, the party's convention, which is next month. How can she improve? Well, she has been criticised in the past for kind of quite shoddy performances when she's speaking, when she's giving interviews. People often accuse her of speaking in platitudes, right? So saying these kind of very general phrases that don't really mean anything. Sometimes when she speaks, she kind of rambles a bit, maybe like I'm doing now. And the other thing she often is accused of is kind of hysterical laughter at...
This is often in the memes.
It is the meme.
These are the memes, okay.
Yeah.
I need to get more up to date with the memes.
There's a lot.
Maybe you can help me with that. But that often she kind of lets out these rather insane peals of laughter at quite inappropriate moments. So I think now that we think is going to become the nominee, maybe she'll get some more intensive media training, public speaking training, and she'll kind of become a bit more polished because, remember, she's taking over an absolutely enormous political machine, right? The Biden campaign has got tens of millions of dollars in the bank that she now has access to because she's taken over the ticket. The campaign has renamed itself Harris for President already. Which tells you something, doesn't it, about their confidence that she will become the nominee. So she's taken over this enormous political machine. That comes with huge amounts of resources, which means, that campaign machinery, all those people, all that money, that will all be laser focused in on her now, and they will be doing everything to make sure that she really, she makes herself shine. She hones up those performances, that public speaking, those media interviews, and starts, speaking a bit more in a way that people can understand and that connects with people. Because it's not just about using nice words or anything like that. You've got to really make a connection with the voters, right? Especially those undecided voters, those people who haven't yet made up their mind whether they're going to vote for President Biden. Whether they're going to vote for Donald Trump or for the Democrat candidate. So especially in those key swing states like we were talking about before, right? Those 6 or 7 key crucial states that will decide this election. The people there who haven't made up their minds, those are the people she needs to focus on.
Interesting, the money I was hearing, $50 million came in 24 hours for Kamala Harris in those 24 hours.
And they already had, I think, almost 100 million in the bank, which, I mean, my bank account isn't like that, but
no, nor is mine. More questions coming in.
We've had one from Kai Phillips. I think we can hear this one, so let's hear what Kai, politics student, has asked.
Hello, I'm Kai. I'm a 21-year-old politics student from Carmarthenshire, and my question for you is, how will Kamala Harris be able to run for president if the primaries have already chosen Biden as the Democratic nominee?
Good question, which I'm going to throw to Ione.
Well, it is a good question. As you say, those primaries have already taken place, but Joe Biden hadn't officially been confirmed as the nominee. That was something that would have taken place at the Democratic Convention, which is later in August. There was some talk of it even happening virtually earlier in August, but it's a slightly weird system that you essentially have a primary where you select your choice and then they aren't actually officially confirmed until that convention takes place. Now, Donald Trump has already had the Republican convention, so he's already officially confirmed as the nominee, but there is still this open window where the Democrats haven't actually officially confirmed anyone as their nominee yet, and that's what we are now going to see happen over the next couple of weeks. It is a slightly strange quirk in the system, but it is why there was all this pressure building on Joe Biden before, because that deadline was kind of approaching. He hadn't officially been confirmed yet, so there was really this kind of window where he had a bit of time to change his mind, to step down, as he has now done. But that is basically the way, that the mechanism that they can now select someone to replace him.
Thanks, Ione. We've had another question which we can take live. So I think Byron, a hospitality worker, is with us now. Byron, what's your question?
My question, from a place of complete ignorance, was, seeing as they seem to always be choosing between basically the lesser of two evils, why is there no credible third candidate, or why do they never vote for anyone else in America?
Okay, Will, why is there never, as Byron put it, a credible third candidate? Why is there not more than just the two?
Well, the US had two parties, a two-party system, ever since it was founded, right, in like the mid-1800s, whenever it was. So that's the system. There are third parties in America, but their candidates never come anywhere close to winning the election. But they can be what we call spoiler candidates, and that's basically when you've got a third candidate that takes votes away from the main two, and that means that you can influence the outcome. For example, in 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost the presidential election to Donald Trump, a lot of people blamed a lady called Jill Stein. Now, she was the candidate for the Green Party, and people accused her of basically taking votes away from Hillary Clinton, splitting the vote, right? So that means that Donald Trump, for example, got 51%, and Hillary, instead of getting more than that, she got less because Jill Stein took some of her votes. Now, Jill Stein always denied that, but that just gives you an idea of how third-party candidates can influence it. And actually, in this election, third-party candidates probably will do better than they've ever done.
And again, comes down to money often as well, doesn't it?
It does come down to money. It's absolutely crucial in American politics, and a lot of these candidates, both for president and for Congress, they spend probably the majority of their political kind of time, their political life, raising money. It's absolutely vital to have enough money in the chest.
Byron, did that answer your question? If not, do you have any follow-ups you'd like to ask?
I'm not sure. I still don't quite see why. Is it purely just because they don't have the money to make themselves well known, these third candidates?
So Byron's saying, is it purely the money means that they become better known across the whole country and there's that name recognition? Is that one of the reasons why we don't see more?
Money is important because that means that you can pay for campaign ads, right? You can pay for campaign ads not only on TV, but on social media, of course, becoming incredibly important now. It's about having enough money to kind of put your message out there, to get the message out to voters, because it's especially important if you're a third-party candidate, because you're not going to be talked about every day on TV, right? On TV, they're talking about Trump versus whoever. So it's even more important for you to have a really kind of targeted, effective ad campaign so that people actually hear who you are and what you stand for. The key third-party candidate in this election, who's doing particularly well in the polls, is a guy called RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and of course we recognise his name. He is the nephew of JFK, John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963, ex-US president.
Thank you, and thank you, Byron. Thanks for coming on BBC News. Very quick question for you, Will. On Instagram, C has asked, can Democrats pick someone other than Kamala Harris?
Yes.
Simple answer.
Yes, they can. At the convention, delegates, that's party representatives from all the different states, they meet, they select a candidate. They're supposed to select the candidate who won the primaries. That's the kind of mini election, all the states, when they pick who they want to be the nominee, right? But they don't have to. And now that the person that won those primaries, Joe Biden, has stood down, that means that they can vote for someone else.
OK, that ties in with this question which we've had from Melissa Sapp, who is an education coordinator. Here's Melissa's question.
Hi there. I'm Melissa, and I'm an American living in London. I'm wondering about the delegates who have committed to vote for Joe Biden in the Democratic National Convention. Are they now obligated to vote for Kamala Harris, or are they free agents? Thank you.
Yeah, so that picks... Thank you very much, Melissa. That picks up on what we were saying. Ione, what do you say to that question? Are we likely to see them changing their minds during that convention in August?
Essentially, Joe Biden is asking all the delegates who are committed to vote for him for Kamala Harris. Now, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that will be the case. However, that is what his sort of expectation is. He is asking them now to vote for Kamala Harris in his place because, of course, now it is sort of there isn't another primary that's going to take place, so there isn't a sort of obligation. And as Will touched on, I think earlier, there's also never, in theory, a sort of absolute obligation. In theory, delegates could decide at the last minute to vote for somebody else, although that would be pretty unprecedented. But I think it is very likely that most of the delegates who have put their weight behind Joe Biden will decide to back Kamala Harris, particularly because of all the high-profile endorsements at the moment. What might get more tricky is if some of them decide to kick up a bit of a fuss, say that they didn't vote for her, they didn't really put her forward as their presidential nominee, only as the vice presidential nominee, and that's where things could get a bit more tricky for her. But at the moment, as I think we've touched on already, she hasn't been challenged for that nomination. There's nobody else putting their hat in the ring at the moment. So it seems at the moment unlikely, unless that changes over the last couple of days, that there are going to be sort of lots of other options for those delegates to vote for.
OK, thanks for the moment. I only got a question that's been sent in from Michael in Charlotte in North Carolina. This one for you, Will. Who in the Democratic Party planted the idea that Joe Biden should debate Trump in July? This idea started the dominoes to fall because traditionally the TV debates don't happen in July, but we did have one, and that was the bad performance, and we're now where we are.
I mean, presidential televised debates have been part of the campaign since the 1970s. As you say, this one happened quite early. There was all kinds of, arguing and discussion about this going on all year about would they debate, wouldn't they, when. At some point, the decision was made, we're not quite sure by who, when, for Biden to take part in this debate quite early. As I say, there were serious questions about his age and his mental fitness. Before that, the debate was clearly the beginning of the end. So we're not quite sure where that decision came from, but, would things have turned out any differently if that debate wouldn't have happened? I mean, it clearly accelerated the process of Biden, pressure being put on Biden to stand down. But I think sooner or later, it would have been clear that, he wasn't able to carry on and that he had to go.
And looking ahead, we have another TV debate scheduled for September, which already Donald Trump is saying he doesn't want on ABC, he wants it on Fox News, whoever he is facing.
That's right, and I'm sure he doesn't want to face Kamala Harris because, the candidate that Donald Trump wanted to compete against in the presidential elections was Joe Biden. Why? Because as we saw in that debate, Trump didn't really have to do anything. He just stood there and saw Biden more or less go to pieces in front of the camera, right? He didn't really have to kind of attack him too much. He was more or less like a bystander. So I think he won't be happy that Biden stood down. He won't be happy that Kamala Harris is most likely going to be the nominee and that people appear to be uniting behind her. As you say, they've raised millions of dollars. So I think he's probably dreading that debate.
Will, thank you for your time. I just want to put you on the spot before you go. Is the candidate that is going to face Donald Trump going to be Kamala Harris?
I think it's very likely.
A diplomatic answer, shall we say. Thank you very much for your time, Will.
Thank you very much, Will.
Well, thank you very much for all of your questions. Hopefully we have managed to answer some of them today. Don't forget, of course, that there will be continuing coverage of the campaign. I know that you talk about it on Reliable Source.
Yep, the Reliable Source podcast. You can also head to the BBC News TikTok and Instagram page if you're not already watching on there, because we'll put every part of this story as it unfolds on those pages.
And of course, talking of podcasts, we also have Americast, which is going to be dominated by this in the months up to November. Are you going to survive until November?
I hope so.
Yeah, you and me too. Thank you very much for joining us on Your Questions Answered here on BBC News.
Thank you.